So how do you delete yourself from the internet? If you do a quick Google search, you'll likely find dozens, if not hundreds of websites with your address, email, phone number, and other personal information. No one wants their personal info publicly accessible on Google, so what do you do? Incogni and DeleteMe are two up-and-coming services that help unlist your info from these public databases. But how do they work, and which of these two is worth using? First, let's back up and understand how these websites are getting your personal information. Websites like True People Search scrape public records like property deeds, tax records, and business records to build a profile of information on a particular person. All of these websites that come up with your personal information aren't getting the data from anywhere secretive. They're just getting it from publicly accessible government databases and really aggregating it in a way that's easier to access. These sites often sell this data to advertisers, and they'll also sell it to individuals who are desperate to track down someone's email address, phone number, or other personal information. So the first thing to understand is that you'll never fully be able to delete yourself from the internet. Unless you can change the laws and eliminate the public government databases, people will have a way to find personal information on you if they look hard enough. But it is possible to make it more difficult for people to find you by delisting yourself from these aggregator websites. However, as you can imagine, a lot of these sites make it overly complicated to delist yourself. They may put the instructions somewhere in some footer that's hard to find, or they may have a multi-step process that takes weeks or even months to complete, and that's just to remove yourself from one of these websites. Oftentimes, by the time you get removed from one site, another site has already popped up with a new record of all your personal information. They're honestly counting on you getting tired of playing this constant game of whack-a-mole and just giving up. Enter Incogni and DeleteMe. Both Incogni and DeleteMe are paid services that exist to play this game of whack-a-mole on your behalf. Instead of pulling your hair out trying to chase down these data brokers, you can just pay someone else to do it for you. Incogni and DeleteMe aren't doing anything special. Everything they do, you could do yourself, but they have lists of all the websites that commonly list your personal information, and they know the steps for each site, so it's way more efficient for them to do it than you to waste a bunch of time doing it yourself. As a result, data removal requests through these services are much more efficient and effective. When I first started comparing these services, I noticed that Incogni has a monthly plan, where DeleteMe only has an annual plan. I wondered why this was, and it seems to be because DeleteMe purges your data quarterly, where Incogni supposedly purges your data constantly. Another advantage to Incogni is that it's available to US, UK, EU, Swiss, and Canadian residents, where DeleteMe is only available to US residents. Incogni's monthly plan is a pretty penny at $13 a month, but the annual plan is reasonable $78. DeleteMe's annual plan is significantly more at $129, and it's the only option to use the service. This made me curious about if DeleteMe was really worth the premium over Incogni. I started with Incogni, and I was honestly surprised at how little personal information I was asked to provide in the onboarding process. I gave them my full name, date of birth, email address, phone number, and current address. I then signed an authorization form to give Incogni consent to request data removal from brokers on my behalf, and that was about it. DeleteMe, on the other hand, was the polar opposite experience. While onboarding, I was asked for all the same info as Incogni, but I was also asked for gender, current and alternative email addresses, and current and alternative phone numbers. DeleteMe even goes so far as to ask for short versions of your name and alternative last names if you're married or changed your last name. You also have the opportunity to provide previous addresses you lived at, employer information, relative information, and more. It's worth noting that supplying a lot of this data is optional, so if you aren't comfortable giving DeleteMe all of your personal information, you don't have to, but I'd argue it's in your best personal interest to do so, because the more complete profile they have on who you are, the more effective they can be at finding these records that list your information and requesting them to be removed. It's also in your best interest to hit that subscribe button. We won't get any of your personal information, and you'll be the first to know about new videos. And finally, DeleteMe requires a photo of your driver's license or passport, and they say this is because some sites require a government ID to process the removal. This is something that made me a bit uncomfortable. I like that I wasn't asked to provide a photo of my ID to Incogni, but it's required by DeleteMe. Fortunately, they do let you mask out the photo of yourself, and they encourage you to do so before submitting it. But enough about the onboarding process. What actually happened in the days and weeks after I signed up for Incogni and DeleteMe? First, it's worth noting that I tested these services with 2 different individuals. This is because I didn't want these services competing to try and remove the same listings for the same person, so I figured it was most fair to isolate it to 2 separate individuals. Within a few days of getting started with Incogni, I got the first report that 119 requests were sent to data brokers and 63 were completed. A month later, 84 requests have been completed and 35 are still in progress. Unfortunately, I did get pestered by a particular data broker as a result of one of Incogni's requests. They reached out to me via email and said that I personally had to respond and verify that I was who I said I was, and then once I replied to their email, it was almost a month before they responded to me again and said that I needed to reply with my date of birth. I don't understand why that's the case because I already gave my date of birth to Incogni. DeleteMe has similar statistics in their dashboard about how many listing removal requests have been sent and how many have actually been processed. However, DeleteMe has a lot more features built in than Incogni. They've got this masking feature that allows you to generate randomized email aliases that forward to your main email to cut down on spam when signing up for new accounts. You can also create a masked phone number, and they're adding support for masked credit cards soon. As I mentioned earlier, DeleteMe gives you the option of providing a much more comprehensive data sheet with your personal information. With Incogni, you can only supply your current information, and I found several listings online by Googling my alternate email addresses. These listings aren't anywhere on Incogni's list to remove, and I have a feeling DeleteMe would have found them since I could have provided them with every email address that I use. This got me wondering if either service had a form you could fill out to request a specific listing be removed if you found one that their system didn't automatically detect. And I was glad to see that DeleteMe does offer such a form, but in the Incogni dashboard, a similar form was nowhere to be found. So after playing around with Incogni and DeleteMe, it's clear that DeleteMe is the superior service. I honestly believe it's worth the extra $50 a year for the simple reason that you can provide all your alternate information, and there's that form to request manual removal of specific listings if you find something that their system doesn't detect. I googled the names of both individuals I tested the service with, and there was a noticeable difference in the amount of personal information publicly available for both people. However, DeleteMe seemed to do a more thorough job, making it nearly impossible to find a single public URL containing personal information on the individual. I was still able to find a few public results on the individual I tested Incogni with, but there was a noticeable difference from before signing up. And to be fair, I had the advantage of knowing this person's information, so I already knew what alternate email addresses and phone numbers to look up and see if I could find any results. If you're a US resident, I'd spend the extra $50 and get DeleteMe. If you really care about removing your online footprint, DeleteMe is far more effective with the tools it provides. But if you're in the UK, EU, or other countries supported by Incogni, it's still a decent option to reduce the number of sites with publicly available information. And ultimately, I think DeleteMe is superior because it's been around since 2010, and they've spent the last 14 years perfecting their service. Incogni is the latest product from Nord Security, which is the parent company behind NordVPN and NordPass. I like seeing Nord Security working on this new product, but Incogni has only been around for a few years. So if you're a US resident, do yourself a favor and spend the extra money on DeleteMe. I've got it linked below with a special discount for your first year. And if you're outside the US, Incogni is still a solid option, but they've definitely got work to do to improve their product. Now, removing your info from these databases is a great start to protecting your privacy, but you may also want to use a VPN to stop your internet service provider and those on public Wi-Fi networks from seeing your browsing activity. I've tested some of the most popular VPNs, and you can get my take on the best ones here.